I'll never forget that morning, the one when we thought the worst was finally behind us. After 3 days of scrambling over slick rock, climbing through blowdowns and tracing a ridgeline that felt endless, the air had that taste of victory in it. The map said less than 4 miles to the trailhead. 4 miles of easy downhill hiking, maybe a late lunch in town if we moved quick. Spirits were high, boots were blistered but light, and the world felt wide open again. I could almost smell the pine and dust of the parking lot below, that peculiar scent of civilization. The trail dropped us into a narrow valley choked with alder and birch. A creek murmured nearby, swollen but harmless looking. We could hear it long before we saw it, but when we finally broke through the trees, the murmur turned to a roar, and what we saw stopped all of us cold. The familiar trickle that cut across this part of the trail had transformed into a wide, raging river, 50 yards across at least, fast and brown with meltwater from the glacier above, the kind of current that could roll a log like a matchstick. No bridge, no crossing. The old game trail that used to ford it was gone, swallowed whole. For a long while, none of us spoke. Just the wind in the spruce tops and the thundering of that river. Tom dropped his pack, rubbing his temples. "That wasn't here in June," he muttered. "I came through then. You could hop across on stones. Maybe a new melt channel had opened, or maybe some distant ice field had given way. Whatever the reason, our way home was gone. We tried to convince ourselves it was temporary, that maybe upstream it would narrow enough to cross. But a scouting trip of half a mile in either direction proved otherwise. Every bend revealed more whitewater, steep banks of clay, and downed timber, blocking any hope of a raft. We sat on a fallen birch, staring at the torrent, the finish line in sight, yet utterly unreachable. The exhaustion that hit wasn't just physical, it was that quiet, hollow ache of knowing nature had the final word. It was Marty who broke the silence. "Well," he said with a half smile, "guess we're not done yet." We all laughed, but it was thin and tired. The easy descent had turned into another long detour. We unrolled the maps, tracing contours with dirty fingers. There was one possible way, a steep scramble north where the ridgeline curved around the basin. It would add at least a day, maybe 2. Food was running low. Still, it was either that or camp here indefinitely. By dusk, the plan was set. Tomorrow, we'd climb back toward the ridge we thought we'd left behind. As the light faded, the river kept roaring beside us, loud, indifferent, eternal. And I remember thinking how strange it was that sometimes the end of a journey isn't where the map says it will be, but wherever you decide not to quit. Morning came, grey and heavy, clouds dragging low across the peaks like wool blankets. The roar of the river hadn't softened. It drummed endlessly in the distance, a reminder of what had turned us back. We packed in silence, every motion slower than usual, the kind of tired that sinks past muscles and into bone. My hands trembled as I tied down my sleeping pad. The air was cold enough to make our breath visible, even in late August. Somewhere upstream, ice was still melting and feeding that furious water. The ridge to the north looked close enough from camp, but once we started climbing, it became a different story. The slope was steep and cluttered with loose shale that skittered underfoot. Every dozen steps, someone would slip, sending a cascade of pebbles rattling down. We moved like ghosts through the fog, our voices muffled by the thick, wet air. By mid-morning, we were sweating under our jackets, pausing often to catch our breath. The packs felt twice as heavy as before. Every so often, Tom muttered to himself, counting paces or cursing quietly when another false summit appeared through the mist. At one point, the fog thinned just enough to catch a glimpse of the river below, a wide, churning ribbon cutting across the valley floor. From that height, it looked almost beautiful, gleaming like liquid glass. Hard to believe that only yesterday we'd been laughing about how easy the rest of the trip would be. Now, that same river might as well have been an ocean between us and home. We stopped around noon on a patch of grass that sloped gently toward a narrow ravine. Marty took out the map again, flattening it against his knee with a sigh. "We're about here," he said, tapping a spot with a grimy finger. "If we can make it to this saddle by nightfall, we'll have a clear line back to the forest road." He said it like a promise, though none of us really believed it. Still, hope is a stubborn thing in the wilderness. It hangs on even when common sense says it shouldn't. As we pressed on, the terrain turned crueler, fallen trees tangled like traps, the ground spongy with moss that hid holes deep enough to swallow a boot. At one point, Ellie went in up to her knee and nearly lost her shoe. We pulled her out laughing, part relief, part hysteria. The laughter faded quickly though, replaced by that quiet endurance hikers know too well, the unspoken agreement to just keep moving. By late afternoon, the clouds finally broke, revealing a strip of pale blue sky. Sunlight hit the ridgeline ahead, and for a moment the world felt alive again. The scent of pine warming in the light, the hum of insects returning. We camped that night just below the saddle, the view sweeping out over miles of wilderness. The river glinted far below, smaller now, almost innocent looking from up here. Around the fire, no one talked much. We just stared into the flames, each lost in thought, each wondering what other surprises the land might have waiting for us come morning. The morning sun came up sharp and golden, washing the peaks in light that made the whole ordeal almost feel worth it. For a few quiet minutes, the camp was still, just the hiss of the stove boiling water and the creak of packs being cinched. My shoulders ached, but after the cold and wet of the day before, the warmth on my face felt like a gift. We ate what passed for breakfast, instant oats with the last handful of dried fruit, and stared out at the jagged country ahead. It looked passable enough from where we stood. Of course, that was the kind of optimism that nature loved to punish. By mid-morning, we were off the ridge, moving through a labyrinth of granite and scrub pine. The terrain dropped steeply toward a saddle that, on the map, promised easier travel. But in reality, it was a maze of deadfall and boulder fields. Each step had to be tested, every handhold double-checked. There were no blazes, no cairns, nothing to suggest anyone had ever come this way before. It was wilderness in its truest sense, unbothered, untamed, and utterly indifferent to our schedule. At one point, Ellie stopped and pointed ahead. "Look," she said, "that has to be the way down." We followed her gaze to a narrow chute between two cliffs, choked with brush, but leading roughly in the direction we needed. It was a gamble, but after the river, gambles felt like all we had left. We descended one by one, sliding on loose gravel, grabbing at roots for balance. Marty, who always took the lead, tested each section before waving us forward. Near the bottom, his boot slipped and he caught himself hard against a rock, letting out a sharp curse. Blood trickled down his forearm, but he waved off help. "Just a scratch," he said, though we could all tell his arm would stiffen by evening. By the time we reached the base of the chute, the light was already thinning. We'd covered less than 5 miles all day, yet it felt like 50. My legs trembled from fatigue. The forest here was thicker, the air cooler and scented with wet earth. Somewhere nearby, water trickled. A spring maybe, or the head of another creek. We followed the sound until we found a narrow stream winding through a meadow. It wasn't much, but it meant fresh water and a flat spot for tents. That night, as we sat around our small fire, I noticed something different in everyone's faces. The frustration had softened into focus, the same kind that comes after accepting that you're deep into something you can't shortcut. We were tired, yes, but the kind of tired that carries purpose. The map lay between us, edges singed from the fire's heat. Tom traced the next day's route slowly, murmuring to himself about contour lines and creek crossings. No one interrupted. The fire crackled. An owl called from somewhere up the ridge, and the cold crept in again. But it didn't feel hostile anymore, it just felt real. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I remember thinking, sometimes the detour is the trail, whether you planned for it or not. And with that thought, sleep came quick and deep. Dawn came with the low growl of wind through the pines. It started as a whisper and rose until the tents bowed and shuddered. The weather had turned again. Grey clouds rolled in from the west, and with them came a biting chill that made every breath feel sharp. We broke camp fast, the fire reduced to cold ash before the first drops began to fall. There was no time for coffee, no talk, just the quiet efficiency of people who've learned that hesitation can cost daylight. The first hour went well enough. The trail, or what passed for one, angled down toward a stand of firs where the land began to level out. We could hear running water again, faint but steady, and that gave us hope we might rejoin the main drainage that led to the old logging road. But when we reached it, the creek was swollen and impassable. The same cruel story written on a smaller scale. It twisted through a narrow gully, the banks slick with mud and moss, impossible to ford without risking a serious fall. The rain had made everything treacherous, and the air smelled of wet rock and pine sap. Tom stood there a long time, hands on hips, water dripping from his hood. "We could backtrack to the ridge," he said. No one answered. We all knew what that meant. Another full day lost, and more climbing on legs that already felt like rubber. Ellie pulled out the map again, pinning it against her thigh in the rain. "If we follow the gully downstream," she said, "we might hit the logging road farther south." It was a long shot, but it was forward, something we desperately needed. The descent was brutal. The gully narrowed into steep-sided walls, the footing loose and uncertain. We half slid, half crawled for hours, each of us soaked and silent. The rain came harder, drumming on our hoods, blurring the world into a grey curtain. Once, Marty lost his footing and tumbled a few feet before grabbing a branch, his pack swinging dangerously. He just laughed breathlessly when we reached him. "Guess that's one way down," he said, teeth flashing in the gloom. By late afternoon, the rain tapered off, leaving the forest dripping and quiet. We stumbled onto a faint track, barely a road anymore, more grass than gravel, but it was enough. Tire ruts, a sign of people, of direction. We dropped our packs and just stood there, too tired, even to cheer. The relief was too big for noise. It was the kind of silence you get when something heavy finally lets go. We made camp, right there on the edge of the road, not caring about level ground or wet gear. The firewood was damp, but after a dozen failed attempts, Tom coaxed out a small flame that smoked and hissed but burned. We huddled close, steam rising from our jackets, the smell of smoke and wet wool filling the air. No one talked about the miles ahead or the ones behind. We just watched the fire and listened to the rain dripping from the trees, feeling the slow return of something like peace. When the sky finally cleared, it was as if the whole forest had exhaled. Mist rose from the ferns, curling like smoke through the trees, and the air carried that clean scent only rain leaves behind, earthy, green, alive. We moved slow that morning, our bodies stiff, but spirits steadier. The road wound gently downhill, each turn revealing more light until at last we stepped out into open country. The valley below glimmered in the sun, the same one we'd aimed for days ago, only now it felt like another world entirely. Somewhere in the distance, we could see the glint of metal, a fence line cutting across the far meadow. Civilization, or at least the edge of it. We followed the track until it joined a broader road, rutted and lined with alder, and then finally, mercifully, we saw the faint shimmer of a vehicle parked under the trees. The sight hit like a wave. Ellie just dropped her pack and laughed, the sound raw and joyous. Marty sat right down in the dirt and ran a hand through his tangled hair, whispering something I didn't catch. For a long while, none of us moved. We just stood there, letting the sunlight soak into our faces, the weight of the past days finally loosening its grip. When we did reach the car, everything felt strangely unreal. Door handles, seat fabric, even the metallic smell of fuel and rubber. Simple things that felt like luxuries now. We peeled off boots, compared blisters, passed around the last scraps of jerky like a feast. The silence that followed wasn't exhaustion this time. It was gratitude, quiet and deep. We'd been turned back, forced to start again, reshaped by something far larger than us, and somehow it felt right. The world hadn't yielded easily, but it had taught us plenty about patience, about humility, about how far you can bend before you break. On the drive back through the forest roads, we glanced often in the mirrors. The peaks loomed distant and bright. the river flashing silver in the sun. From up there, you'd never guess how furious it had been, how it had blocked our way and rewritten our plans. That's the thing about wild places. They don't owe you progress or fairness or even logic. They just are, and if you're lucky, they teach you to meet them on their terms. That night, back in town, we sat outside a diner still wearing our trail clothes, smelling faintly of smoke and mud. The waitress asked where we'd come from, and Tom just smiled and said, "Around." None of us tried to explain. How do you describe the way the land humbles you, then gives you back a different version of yourself? I still think of that trip when things don't go as planned, when the path turns the bridges out or the river's too high. Because sometimes the detour isn't a mistake at all, it's just the trail reminding you that you're not in charge of the map, only how you walk it.